All sorts of nonsense is talked about gas and gas prices. We have a shock, and most people who comment upon these things seem to think that a shock is the same as a trend. So along comes the Russian army and invades Ukraine. Up goes the gas price, and up a bit goes the oil price. Why? Well, because Europe is overwhelmingly dependent upon Russian gas. It's a spike. But then prices have fallen back by 90% since then, and 40% last year, up until the next spike, which is the US and Israel attacking Iran. So the attacks take place. The Strait of Hormuz, on which China and India and Southeast Asia are particularly reliant, it gets squeezed. Qatar's LNG gets attacked. Up goes the price of gas, and indeed up goes the price of oil. Now, these shocks happen, and it's really important that energy policy takes for granted that there will be shocks, as opposed to relies on complacency to get by and then get surprised. But it's not right to conclude that in the context of shocks, actually downwards as well as upwards, that therefore this proves that the right energy policy is to get out of gas. Because, as we're now told repeatedly, gas prices are high and volatile. Yes, they are now. Yes, they were when Russia invaded Ukraine. But no, they're not afterwards, and most likely they probably won't be in the future too. A trend is not the same as a spike. And we've been making this assertion, or rather energy ministers have been making this assertion about gas prices being high and volatile, to argue that we just need to get out of gas. If only we could not use gas at all and we could rely on wind and solar, then, hey presto, it'd all be fine, plus a few nuclear power stations as well. So after more than a decade, indeed almost 2 decades, of building substantive wind generation and indeed quite a lot of solar as well, the questions that arise are we really getting out of gas? Is it working? Are our prices lower because we've got more renewables, and indeed no coal, compared to our European partners and compared with prices more generally across the world, and particularly in the United States? Well, no. The UK is 35% dependent for its energy on gas. And there's no sign whatsoever that that 35% is going to go down a lot anytime soon. Why? Well, in addition to all that gas that keeps the lights on, there's the small matter of the use of gas for heating and, of course, industrial use more generally. We forget when we obsess about net zero 2030 electricity that electricity is only part of the story, and we are over 70% dependent on fossil fuels. And since we have no coal, or hardly any coal at all in the British economy now, that means gas and oil. So we're not getting out of gas, and therefore our exposure to gas and its prices will remain. There's much we can do about that exposure, but it's a different question to ask, how are you going to manage your gas dependency, as opposed to the question, how do we get out of gas as fast as possible, or indeed, should we even try to do so? The second issue that comes up in this regard is the obvious question which would arise in any security policy. Are we making the best use of our own gas in a context in which we are importing quite a lot as well? Well, here the answer is obviously no. We have an energy policy designed to get us out of North Sea gas. In the initial phase, to stop issuing any new licenses and to squeeze the gas companies really hard in the North Sea with a very burdensome windfall tax. Basically, we put up the sign that, no, we don't want you to produce in the North Sea, and we'll put up with it for as long as we have to, but we're going to pressurize you downwards. And at the same time, we put up a sign, oh, please provide us with imports, Norway, United States LNG and elsewhere, because although that gas is produced in the North Sea, in the Norwegian case, just not in the British sector, and from the much more polluting LNG, you know what, we'd rather have that than we would have our own homegrown energy upon which ministers are so keen. So we're not using our own gas, and as a result, we are less secure than otherwise would be the case. Now, ministers reply to this in what is superficially plausible by saying, well, you know what? It doesn't really matter whether we produce the gas in the North Sea or Norway or in the United States or elsewhere, because the reality is that the gas price isn't going to be determined in our sector of the North Sea. It's going to be determined in world markets. We are vulnerable to the behavior of dictators and autocrats like Putin, and we're at the mercy of the states that control the Gulf and its supplies. Well, that's not true either. For much of the history of gas from the North Sea, we got our gas on long-term take-or-pay contracts. The conditions were pretty straightforward. If you wanted to produce gas in the continental shelf of the UK, you had to land it in the UK, and you had to sell it to British Gas, and British Gas signed long-term take-or-pay contracts, which also provided the basis for storage, since the gas reserves could be flexed through the contracts to ensure that we had security of supply. You don't have to buy gas on the spot price. You can buy it on a contract basis. The reason we got out of long-term contracts is because the spot price fell so much, particularly in the late 1990s. But, use a bit of imagination. If we're really worried about gas security and we want homegrown stuff and we want to consider the conditions for issuing new licenses, why isn't the state saying, look, you can have a license provided you meet the environmental criteria, of course, best practice and so on, but also you agree long-term contracts. So we have a price, we know what it is, and we're no longer vulnerable to that volatility that so upsets ministers and gives them the reason for wanting to reduce the gas position. Okay, you might say, well, yeah, but someone's got to sign these contracts. Well, take a look at what we're doing in our energy sector. The government is effectively the contractor for all new electricity generation in this country through the CFDs. There's no reason why there couldn't be an equivalent contractual relationship between gas production in the North Sea and the purchase of it inside the UK. You might even be imaginative and provide that gas contracted to large industrial users as part of your industrial policy. So the three myths that are trotted out about gas are that we're getting out of gas, we're not, that we are using our own gas, no, and that the price of our own gas has to be tied to the world price and follow wherever the world price goes. Well, no, actually, it doesn't. We need to take a much more sensible, balanced, and rational view about where we're going to go on gas into the future. We have North Sea gas. It's less polluting to use that gas than it is to use LNG cargoes from the United States. And by the way, the United States could at any time decide not to export gas. It is the largest LNG exporter in the world, but it could say, you know what, I need that for my domestic markets. I need it for the data centers to generate electricity and so on. That's a serious vulnerability. So we should really think about whether we want to have that highly polluting gas, given we're going to use the stuff anyway. And then we have to think finally about how all this ties up with our overarching energy policy. It's somewhat news to ministers over the last 5 or even 10 years that energy security matters, and that for the UK, it's not the case that because we have more wind and gas, we are less exposed to gas prices globally. We're more exposed than anybody else. After all, we have the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world. The gas price feeds straight through into electricity prices rather than through a, let's say, gas strategic reserve and capacity payment and so on. All those things could be taken to frame. We don't have any storage. We could have some serious storage. And indeed, new licenses could incorporate what I would call a storage element. And we could manage those supplies in a way which helps British industry, which after all is, from an energy point of view, deeply in a crisis, and a crisis quite a lot of our own making, where effectively they're priced out of world markets. That's the position we find ourselves in, and we should stop trotting out myths about gas markets and homegrown and all that stuff, and start to take seriously what confronts our economy going forward so that we can address decarbonisation in a sensible and rational way, rather than as a kind of Orwellian story of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad in George Orwell's Animal Farm. Gas is going to be there whether we like it or not. Let's do it responsibly, let's do it securely, and let's do it in an environmentally benign way. What we're doing at the moment is certainly not environmentally benign when you look at the LNG component of supply. It's certainly not secure, and it's not priced in a sensible way to address competitiveness of the British economy. We can do so much better if we get away from the simplistic slogans and start to think seriously about our gas situation. Thank you.